I did my critical review on Closing the Innovation Gap, Reigniting the Spark of Creativity in a Global Economy by Judy, Estrin. And the main idea of this book is about how innovation has changed our lives for the better over the past half century or so, particularly scientific innovation, not just innovation coming from that entrepreneurial spirit. And she gives a few examples of some companies that have been doing this, like Pixar and Google in the first couple chapters. And then she talks about how this is all possible, or how this has been possible over the past 50 years, with an idea called the innovation ecosystem, which I'll get to in a little bit. She spends the next couple chapters going over how this came to be in the period after the Second World War, and how it led to all the great technological and scientific innovations over the past few decades, and how we're still feeling the effects of just basic research and development that was done 30 or 40 years ago. And later on in the book, about the midpoint or so, and for the rest of it, she talks about how this innovation ecosystem is being challenged, mainly by elements in the corporate world, like overemphasis on short-term goals and personal greed, lack of risk-taking that there was earlier. And then she offers some proposals in the last couple chapters how to close this innovation gap, so to speak, how to bring us back to where we were in the 1950s and 60s with a strong entrepreneurial risk-taking spirit and a very powerful commitment in the country to pursuing science. So before I get going anymore, I thought I'd talk a little bit about the author. Her background actually works really well for this book, I think. She has a lot to say about science and technology because it's been around her whole life. Her parents were both PhDs in electrical engineering, and they were part of teams that helped develop the computer. And personally, when she was in college at UCLA and then Berkeley as a grad student, she did a lot of work with computers too, working with some very important innovators in the field. And then she was also, she started up many companies herself, so she has that first-hand entrepreneurial experience. And in the 1990s, she was actually the CTO for Cisco, so she was right there at the heyday of the Silicon Valley networking boom. And so this innovation ecosystem that I've been talking about, she brings it up in the second chapter, and much like a biological ecosystem, the three elements in the middle there, research, development, and application, are all very interrelated, and if one isn't quite fully developed, the whole system's not going to work as effectively as it can. So the way it works is scientists and researchers discover a new technology, and then engineers develop that new technology to make it practical for everyday use. And then people in the field, like doctors and engineers, people working with the technology, they can fine-tune it, and there's where you get the steady-state innovation and inspiration for future ideas. And the cycle just keeps going and going. And this, the 5 words on the outer circle there, those are kind of ideas that can keep the system running. When she talks about how to close the innovation gap, she talks a lot about how these ideas have kind of been squandered in the last 20 or 30 years, and how the U.S. can get back to restoring them and thus making the ecosystem stronger again. And so after she introduces the innovation ecosystem, she spends a few chapters just kind of going over the history of the scientific and technological and medical innovations of the past 50 years. It really started after World War II, once there was that emphasis on science that came from trying to create the atomic bomb, trying to win the war, and then the GI Bill, which sent millions of people to school. Many of them were very entranced by science. They saw that all the benefits that science could provide society, so they went and studied it. And also there was just the race continued even after World War II, with the Soviet Union launching the Sputnik satellite that led to the space race. There was a great technological race there. So you had millions of people who were very interested in science, were willing to pursue it, and the government and corporations were very willing to provide millions and millions, if not billions of dollars towards research to develop these goals. And so also then in the 50s and 60s, businesses were very much in on developing science too, not just government funding. A big example of this that we've talked about in class several times was the Bell Laboratories and all the amazing innovations that came out of there. And also in the 1950s and 60s, some of the very first venture capital startups were forming in Silicon Valley. That's where that all came about. And so that too, along with the government funding and the corporate funding, was just creating all sorts of, making all sorts of scientific and technological breakthroughs. And Estrin argues that these discoveries back in the 50s and the 60s, we're just now feeling them, or we've just felt them in the past 20 years or so with the mainstream use of the computer, the internet, MP3 players, all sorts of things like that. And so Estrin's arguing then that it was these developments so long ago that have created the world that we live in now, and so that we shouldn't forget the importance of all that basic research and development. And so after that, she talks about more recent history, the past 20 or 30 years, and how the innovation ecosystem's been put into a little bit of danger, or at least the critical research for new scientific discoveries has slowed somewhat, in part due to, like I said, that overemphasis on short-term goals and a less risk-averse management. Basically, it's all come down more to just corporate bottom lines. Like if they're examining a new disruptive technology, they're going to be less persuaded to actually go about pursuing it, just if it won't create positive financial gains at the end of a quarter or at the end of a certain amount of time. So there's much less patience to just seek out these new scientific discoveries, and obviously that can be a problem, because she likes to think of the research and development part of the innovation ecosystem as like the roots of a tree. And even though the tree, the technology we have now may seem strong and robust, it was all due to all that time and attention and dedication towards the basic research and development 20 or 30 years ago. So that if we don't have that now, we might lose our technological edge in the future, because other countries are devoted to this stuff like we used to be. And let's see. And so then, after she discusses these problems, she goes over some possible solutions. A big idea she thought was the green thumb leadership, which is basically like an analogy to management, to be like a careful gardener taking care of just germinating plants, things like that. Like for new disruptive ideas that have been discovered, they need to nurture them and not be so quick to put them down. They need to be willing to give innovators a second chance or a third chance, as opposed to just giving them that one go, and if it doesn't work, they're done. Because things don't always work out on the first try. A lot of innovators have had trial and failure, but eventually things have worked out for them. And so they need to refocus R&D funds on more long-term investments, like I was saying before about keeping the roots strong. And then in the education sector, it just needs to be a little more reform to take it away from just trying to pass standardized tests, and actually to try and teach more critical entrepreneurial thinking, and then to also try and impart just a basic scientific literacy to anyone going through college or in K through 12 schooling, even if they don't plan a career in science. Estrin argued that having that information in their backgrounds would be very helpful for them in business and in any other fields. And I found a few reactions to the book that were pretty interesting. There was a New York Times article that was wondering if Estrin's thoughts that the innovation ecosystem is in danger were a little bit overblown, but they also recognized that she had a good point about the whole roots being weakened from not having the focus on long-term research and development. So I think they weren't quite settled on that criticism. And then I found a blog which had an interesting approach, I thought, saying that by just writing a book about how we need to innovate better, Estrin was kind of short-sighted there. She should have tried to take a more innovative approach, like using social media and being more out there, using all the sources of technology that she helped develop in the first place. And that's a good point. I mean, I don't really see too many other people doing that, but that would be a good way to kind of practice what you preach, so to speak, about how to close the innovation gap. And I personally liked the book. I thought that her background with science and technology and running businesses really made her animated, and she cared about the subject matter. The book read pretty well, pretty fluid for me, I think. And it's definitely a subject I think about a lot, too. I see the headlines about the U.S. losing its science and technology gap all the time. So I thought it was a very prescient read, for sure. And, it ties into class with the whole focus on how innovation has made our lives better, and how we need to nurture this entrepreneurial spirit in Americans, as well as trying to educate them on what innovations have come to be, and how to, and how that was all possible through the long-term research and development. So I think in that sense it really does tie into what we've been discussing in this class.